Hi there, creatives. I am so excited that you are joining me today to explore stitch meditation. It's a fascinating practice that I've been doing for over 10 years, and that is saying something because I'm a mixed media artist. I don't really do anything for 10 years, but I have stuck with this practice for so long because it's brought me so much joy. It's expanded my skills as an artist, and it's helped reduce the stress in my life and help me enjoy meditation. Let me tell you a little bit about the origin story of this practice. It was created out of necessity. I needed something. So I used to be really, really sick. I had a lot of autoimmune disorders, the kind where the doctor's like, well, this one has this really crazy name, nobody can really pronounce it, and there's no support groups, and nobody knows how to cure it, and just like reduce the stress in your life. That'll help with the inflammation. I'm like, great, thank you. And I was just getting sicker and sicker, and I thought, how am I going to reduce the stress in my life because I have three teenage boys. Like that's like that equals stress, right? Three teenage boys, stress. All the sports, all the school, all the things. I was also homeschooling. So he suggested meditation, and I tried. I really tried. I gave it like all my effort to really try, and I was a complete failure at meditation. It just didn't work for me. And I was reading this book one day about meditation and the origins of meditation, and I realized that the way meditation is thought of and generally taught, it really has nothing to do, there's no connection or intersection with the busy life of a Western woman. It's just, it doesn't work. At least it didn't work for me. I know it works for many people, but I could not do more than 5 minutes. That was about the tops I could do. And it took me a long time to realize that I needed the meditation, but I couldn't figure out how to coordinate it into my life. So I had just finished writing the Threads book, the Threads Basics and Beyond, and it was so much machine stitching. And when you write a book, you have to like stitch everything over and over and over again. So I was kind of tired of machine stitching. So I went back to my first passion, which was hand stitch, not embroidery. I never have done formal embroidery. I've done like attempted formal embroidery, but it just doesn't excite me. So I started back into hand stitching, and I thought, oh, this is actually fairly relaxing, and I can kind of sit here quietly. And the physicalness of it, the touching the soft fabrics and moving the needle gave me just enough focus that I could stitch, that I could keep working through this and create a meditation style that worked for me. That was a huge realization that I could make something up that worked for me. So it took me a few months of trial and error and kind of trying out different things and seeing which practices and processes work the best. And so then I came upon my stitch meditation practice that we know today. And I love it that it's easy to share. You don't need a lot of equipment. If you don't have a lot of fabrics, you can easily find them at secondhand stores. You can use old garments, you can use old table linens. There is no limit on the materials you can use. And I'll go over that a little bit in the tutorial. So enjoy. I hope you will try this. It has really changed my life. In addition to helping me be more relaxed and helping me reduce the stress and get healthy again, it has changed the way I, I approach my artwork. It has opened a door that I didn't even know was closed. So I hope you'll give it a try. Have fun stitching.
So, just for your stitch meditation, obviously you need some fabric because we are working fabric. You can also use some paper. You do not need to have a giant basket of fabric like this. I have lots of scraps from over the years, and I'm a bit of a collector, so I have a rather large selection here. But you don't have to have a basket this big. And one of the places you can find fabric really reasonably, if you don't already have any fabric, is thrift shops. They almost always have fabric. And there are some shops that are art thrift shops, and they almost always have fabric too, and they have a lot of art supplies. So you might try there. The other thing you can do is raid your closet. Um, I, I use old linens, and I dye them or I overpaint them, like old tablecloths and napkins, that kind of thing, vintage linens. You can use just about any fabric. The only thing you want to stay away from is anything that's too tightly woven, because then it's hard to hand stitch through. Um, so really be creative when you start to look for fabrics if you don't already have a stash. And you can always ask your friends. Anybody who's a quilter or a seamstress, they always have scraps, and they're usually happy to share them out because nobody wants their scraps going into the landfill. So the other thing you need is a base fabric to work on. I work on a base of flannel, cotton flannel, and in some countries it's called flannelette. And I prefer this as a base because it's very easy to stitch through and it's very soft and it's inexpensive. But you can always use old flannel blankets, especially like the kids' baby blankets. They're usually flannel, and you can cut those up. You can usually find those. Anything, an old, some of my students use denim. That's always a great base. It's easy to find denim. Usually we all have a few pair of jeans that don't fit or are really not suitable for public. So you can use anything for a backing, but you want it to be something that's easy to stitch through. I've been known to take my own old clothes and cut them up as backing or the front material. So I use either way. So you need some thread. Pearl cotton is probably the easiest to start with, and it can be any brand. There's lots of beautiful brands of threads out there. So, and it's also another good place to find, another good thing to find at the thrift store. A lot of times people are cleaning out their stash and they just give it to the thrift store. So definitely check there. And then there's embroidery floss. Oh, this ring of embroidery floss is a little mottled, but they're great to work with as well. They're a little more fidgety because you have to separate the strands, unless you want to use all 6 strands. So I usually suggest beginners start with pearl cotton. You can also use regular sewing thread. I tend to go in spurts where I'll use regular sewing thread, and then I'll go back to pearl cotton, and then I'll switch to floss. I just kind of go with whatever I happen to have. Usually it's whatever I have in the right color. So when I start, so the first rule is you don't want to spend more than a couple minutes picking out your fabrics. When I sit down and I look in my fabric bin, there's usually something that grabs me right away, like, oh, I really want to work with this red orange today, or this green is making me happy. Don't overthink it. Just pick one thing and then pick a couple more to go with it, because it's not a project. It's about the process, and that is the hardest thing to relearn. We're so focused in our culture on having a useful product, but really it's the process here that's important, not the end result. So I picked this one, and then I found these that kind of went with it. And so usually I'll just make a little pile next to my chair where I sit, and then I'll start with just covering my base. Usually it's not a requirement that you cover your base fabric. You can leave some of it showing. I think I liked it the way I started it, like this. And the first thing I do is thread my needle, of course, and I'm using a chenille needle. The chenille needle has a nice big eye, and I usually use a 24 or a 22, but they also have 20s that are nice and big. If you have an open weave fabric, you want to match your needle to your fabric, and not so much. I mean, the thread is important, that it can easily go through the eye, but if it's too thick a thread for a tightly woven fabric, then you will have a hard time stitching and pulling the needle through, and that's not very meditative. So, oh, and as far as needles, the reason I use chenille needles is because they're so easy to thread. And I kind of have a rule of thumb that if you can't get it threaded on 3 tries, get a bigger needle. We're not trying to use a tiny needle here. There's nothing more frustrating than not being able to thread your needle. And I always start and settle into my meditation by stitching around the outside of the piece. And I always start, and if I have 2 pieces of fabric or 3 pieces of fabric, I start where they join because I want to come back and connect. That's where I want to end. And so instead of starting here, I start over here. But it doesn't really matter. There aren't any rules. And really the key here is to work pretty intuitively. You want to kind of relax into the process. And I find that the running stitch around the outside is just perfect. It kind of gets everything set in place. And the running stitch is so relaxing. It really allows me to, as soon as I start doing it, I have this deep breath and I slow down. My thoughts slow down. It's like my left brain has said, oh, we're doing that again. Okay, well, I'm going to go do something else because this is way too boring for me. And I say, good job, left brain. Go do something else. Go have a nap. And then we'll call you when we're done, when we need you again. And I definitely feel my body relax. Now, I have been doing this for almost 8 years, or it might be 8 years already this year. I've kind of lost track of how long I've been doing it. So as soon as I sit down in my meditation chair, and start this first round of running stitch, I just feel my whole body relax. And your space is important, but not critical. For me, I choose a space that has a little view of the outside, because the outside is very important to me. Being out in nature is one of my places where I really just fill my well. I just love being outside. So find a place. It might be a sunny place, it might be your favorite chair. It doesn't really matter. You want to have your supplies right there. You don't want to be getting up to go do something in the middle of it. That would be super frustrating. You don't want to have interruptions, like the cell phone's in another room. Everybody else knows to leave you alone at this point so that you can have your quiet time. Now, one of the questions I get asked is about music or doing this in front of the TV. And music is fine as long as it's an instrumental. Anything with words is going to reactivate your left brain, and that kind of defeats the purpose of trying to meditate and get into your right brain. So if you're doing this in the evening in front of the TV, that would just be slow stitch. That would not be stitch meditation. It's 2 different things. Slow stitch is wonderful for reducing stress and for relaxing, but it doesn't give you the same deeper access to your right brain that meditation does. So no music unless it's instrumental. I actually prefer complete quiet, and my studio is it's over the garage, so it's a little removed from the noise inside the house. So if somebody leaves, it gets very noisy when they open the garage door. So that's some of the biggest questions that come up. So here, and once I get to all the way around, then I am letting my intuition tell me what to stitch next or what to do next. And I have some other pieces of fabric here, and I love this bright, cheerful yellow on here. Maybe some purple. Feels very springtime. So I'll just kind of figure out what else is gonna go on here. Maybe something. We'll just go with that for now. So I know these are going to go here, and so I'm going to stitch along here and join these 2 pieces of fabric because they don't overlap very much. One of my favorite ways to cover this little join is what I call railroad tracks. It's just a straight stitch going over that join. And you may notice some of my fabrics are messy. They are not, I do not iron, I iron them and then I put them in the basket and then they promptly get messy and unironed. So I don't get up in the middle of the process and iron it. You want to sit down to your stitch meditation practice and not stop and get up and do something else. Part of the reason for that is to stay focused in the right brain. And that brings me to the one main rule. Now here, I think I'm going to put this one here. So I'm just going to switch to stitching along this edge. So there's one rule with stitch meditation, and that's you cannot take a stitch out. You're absolutely forbidden to take a stitch out. And I'll tell you why. Because when you take a stitch out, you are no longer in the moment of the stitch. You are no longer in the rhythm of the stitch. Your brain has switched from right brain to left brain because it's all of a sudden concerned with perfection. And this process is about avoiding switching back into that left brain. That if you give your left brain something to do, it will, or something to think about, it will come right back to rescue you, as it should. So we don't want to, you just know you cannot take a stitch out. And I'm going to go back here. There's not necessarily a rhyme or reason for how I'm stitching this. I kind of just stitch it as my brain says. Stitch it, like stitch here and then go stitch over there. Get up to that point. And I'm not usually talking while I'm doing a stitch meditation. So this is a little different. But that's the one rule, is you cannot take a stitch out. You're not making a project. This may end up being something beautiful, and you are welcome to use it as you see fit. Sometimes I take mine and make greeting cards out of them. Just going to do a knot. And in case you need a little knot tutorial, I have a video on YouTube with how to do a knot, but you want to kind of make a little loop here and run the thread underneath the needle, and then hold that spot down with your finger and pull, and then your knot will be very close to the fabric edge. And I'm just putting my fabric back, my thread back under there so that it's not coming out the edge. Now where was I? So using these, sometimes I will create cards and give them to friends. Sometimes I mount them and sell them. Sometimes I mount them and give them to friends. And sometimes, most of them, oops, that did not thread very well. Most of them live in a basket, and I will show you that at the end of this video. And that is my most asked question, is what do you do with these? And I just try and remind everyone that it's the process of doing it that is important, not the end result. So it doesn't matter what you do with them. You can do nothing with them. And some of that is culturally the way we're instructed, that everything we do has to have a purpose or a reason or a greater, has to be valued. And a lot of people don't understand the value in the process is so much more important than the end product. Just tucking that in there so it will be caught under that. And you can see I'm still just using a running stitch. It's the easiest stitch. Almost everyone in their life has done a running stitch just to stitch something together. It's simple. It has a beautiful rhythm when you're stitching it, and I find that I can almost use my breath with the same pace as the stitch. And this is a little bit crooked here, but again, that's not important. It doesn't matter if the square is perfect or if your stitches are perfect. This is not about perfection. This is about reducing stress and embracing the creative genius that is in your right brain, letting it come forth and help you solve all the problems you need to solve. I never use a complicated stitch on stitch meditation. I use a straight stitch, this running stitch, this kind of stitch a lot. I will use cross stitches, but they're not even. And I will use a back stitch and some French knots sometimes, because I find French knots relaxing. A lot of people find them frustrating. Sometimes I make shapes. I will show you some of my meditations. I'll do some cross stitches in here so you can see how that might look. But the entire process, I've found the reason it's so freeing is that letting go of perfection, of not trying to create something important. It's amazing how it frees your mind to come up with all kinds of fantastic ideas when you take off the pressure of creating something important or something of value. So many of my stitch meditations are incredibly beautiful, and a lot of them are really ugly and crooked, and in no way would anyone ever consider them art, but their purpose is not art. Their purpose is relaxation. Their purpose is mindfulness and stress reduction and connecting to my right brain. And they do that job beautifully every time, whether or not they turn out beautiful or ugly. I always try and let my brain, my right brain, tell me where I'm stitching. Sometimes it tells me, sometimes it's quiet. And if you listen, it will tell you when it's done. It will tell you when you're done. Sometimes my brain, my right brain, my creative muse tells me it's done well before I think it's done. But then I stop because it said it was done. And then when I look at it later, it's like, oh yes, that simplicity is just perfect the way it is. I spend about a half an hour on my stitch meditation every morning. In life, it gets crazy sometimes. I don't always get to do it, but I try, usually average about 5 hours, 5 times a week. And I would say this one is done. Let me take a moment and share with you some of my basket of meditations. See, I didn't even use all those. They were just there in case. So this is my giant basket of meditations. And sometimes I go through these, sometimes I mount them, and sometimes I just look at them and I remember the emotion or the energy of that day, what I was thinking. Remember a piece of fabric, where it came from. I do have themes, weekly themes that I have create for my patrons over on Patreon, and so a lot of these are from themes, but I don't always have a theme. And every time when I come back to look at them, sometimes I marvel that I made that. They're so beautiful. And what I love about this process is that the materials are so inexpensive, and it doesn't take very long. So there's a freedom to experiment, a freedom to try something different, a freedom to explore that doesn't always come when you sit down to do something, a piece of artwork. So even if you don't like the practice of stitch meditation, try some sort of practice in your sketchbook or in collage, whatever your medium is. If it's calligraphy, whatever it is, just commit to something that you can do that's small every day. The other thing I wanted to say is, for me, it's important that I finish these every day, and that's why I work in this small size. It's 4 inches by 4 inches. Some of my students prefer to work on a bigger piece, and they work on it for multiple days. So there's no rule about the size. I needed completion every day. I needed to have that satisfaction of finishing. So make it your own, but just make sure you follow the rule that you don't take a stitch out, because that is critical. I hope you enjoyed the demonstration and introduction to the stitch meditation practice, and I hope you'll go ahead and explore it. And if stitching isn't your thing, go ahead and think about some other way that you can create your own kind of meditation and mindfulness practice. You can draw, you can dance, anything that helps you get into more mindfulness and creativity. We often talk about creativity being a muscle that you use, but I think it's more like a door that we've kept closed for so long. We just need a little way to open it up, and that's what stitch meditation has done for me and so many others. I would love to have you join me on my Facebook Stitch Meditation group. It's totally free. If you want to go more in depth with stitch meditation, I have a Patreon group, and then I have lots of information on my website, Textile Evolution. And I also sell kits. If you want to try it, but you don't really want to take the time to gather the materials and get everything together, I have some really beautiful kits that are made with hand-dyed fabrics that I use. So don't hesitate to ask me any questions that you have. I'm always happy to answer them.